Hello everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today we are going to look at the book of Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah is the 16th book of the Old Testament. The Hebrew Bible has 3 sections: the Law, Prophets, and Writings. The Law contains the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The Prophets are made up of 8 books divided into the former and latter prophets. And the Writings consist of religious poetry and wisdom literature, such as Psalms, Proverbs, and Job, and the books of Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So in the Hebrew Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah are found in the Writings section. Now, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah were originally considered one book called Ezra. Later, it was separated into 2 books by Origen and Jerome in about the 3rd and 4th century AD. Also, Ezra and Nehemiah was not separated into 2 books in the Hebrew Bible until the 15th century. Now, the purpose of Ezra and Nehemiah is to present a history of the Jews from their return from Babylon until they rebuilt their temple and Jerusalem walls and lived as a new community in Jerusalem. So the most important events in Ezra and Nehemiah are recorded for the Jews to remember what God was accomplishing for them during this time of restoration and reform in Jerusalem. Despite their sinful past, God intervenes on behalf of the Jews, even through a pagan king like Cyrus, so that they can continue to live as God's people. With this purpose in mind, let me give you an overview of the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapters 1 through 7 focuses on the problem of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. The story picks up in 445 BC, when the Persian king sent Nehemiah, one of his trusted officials, who happened to also be an Israelite, to help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. After Nehemiah heard of the situation in Jerusalem, he cried out and confessed Judah's sin and interceded on their behalf for 4 months. One day, the Persian king granted all of Nehemiah's requests and sent him to rebuild Jerusalem's walls. Soon after arriving, Nehemiah made a secret inspection of the walls and then persuaded the people of Jerusalem to help him. Although there was some objection to his plan to rebuild the temple walls, most of the Jewish people accepted a small assignment to rebuild a section of the wall. Now, the enemies of Nehemiah mocked the quality and craftsmanship of their work on the wall and made plans to attack the city. In response, Nehemiah prayed to God for protection from these enemies, and he placed additional guards in key locations, armed his workers, and motivated the people to trust in the power of God. When the wall was almost finished, some men tried to destroy Nehemiah's reputation and stop the work of the wall, but each time Nehemiah saw through their evil plans and depended on God for help. Nehemiah prayed again for deliverance from them, and his enemies eventually stopped when they saw that the completion of the walls was the work of God. After the threefold restoration of the community and city, as seen in Ezra chapters 1 through 6, Ezra chapters 7 through 10, and Nehemiah chapters 1 through 6, Nehemiah decided to repopulate Jerusalem by selecting people to relocate based on their genealogy if it matched up with the list of those who were part of the first group of exiles. Now the next section, Nehemiah's chapters 8 through 10, deals with the need for Judah to renew their covenant relationship with God. Standing in front of Judah, Ezra read God's law in Hebrew, while priests translated and explained it in Aramaic, which was the native language of this generation of Jews. The people repented with weeping and they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles in an unparalleled way since the days of Joshua. 2 weeks later, the people wept and confessed their sin and promised to separate themselves from sin. After a long prayer confessing God's faithfulness and their sinfulness, a group of Jews signed their names to a sealed document promising to obey God's word, to not marry foreigners, to pay the annual temple tax, and to support the priests by bringing the first fruits of their harvest to the temple. The final section of Nehemiah deals with Nehemiah's efforts to resettle and organize Jerusalem after the walls were built and his confrontation of the people's sins when he returned to Jerusalem. Since Jerusalem was thinly populated, the community decided to relocate 1/10 of the people from the countryside to Jerusalem, thus carrying out what Nehemiah had begun back in Nehemiah chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. With the city fully repopulated, there was a celebration to dedicate the city walls, featuring a double procession including both Ezra and Nehemiah. The joy at the dedication echoes the joy at the reading of the law, at the beginning of the rebuilding of the temple, and at its dedication. However, this picture of joy and obedience to God will be short-lived. Despite clear instruction from God's word, when Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem, he found that the people were no longer living according to God's instructions. They let an inappropriate person live in the temple, so Nehemiah had to throw them out. They were no longer bringing tithes to support the priests, so Nehemiah confronted them. Some people were working on the Sabbath, and others were buying and selling on the Sabbath, so Nehemiah stopped these practices. Finally, he found out some had married foreigners again, so he addressed this problem again. The final line of the book of Nehemiah comes from Nehemiah himself. Remember me, O my God, for good. Nehemiah's cry reveals the virtue of Nehemiah in contrast with the flaws of Judah. This reminds us that even with the best intentions of the community under ideal leadership, God's people continue to fall back into sin. While the people confess that God's plan for them has not been completely fulfilled, the final chapter of Nehemiah shows that their behavior has never been fully reformed. Thank you to today's sponsor, On Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskill. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the book of Ezra, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. Until next time, see you!